Welcome, everyone, to what promised to be another great half an hour to talk about the evolution of leadership and the CEO lifecycle in our LinkedIn learning series. Leadership isn't static, it evolves, it adapts, it transforms over time, and the challenges that leaders faced yesterday are not the same that they're facing today, nor will they be the challenges that leaders face tomorrow. How leaders adapt and evolve determines success and failure in their role. And to that effect, we're bringing together a series of the most insightful speakers, people who have led, who've lived the role, observed the role, studied the role, into a dialogue and a learning series to help everyone aspiring to be a leader adapt the challenges and headwinds and tailwinds that might be coming their way. And today I'm honored to have Nigel Travis join us for a great conversation about the complacency trap. Welcome, Nigel.
Claudius, good morning. Good to see you again.
Nigel, you're probably in the hundreds of interviews we've done to date about leadership and in our conversations with CEOs, you're probably the most well-rounded leader that we could be discussing the topic of complacency today. You have not only been an active CEO leading Dunkin' Donuts in private ownership structure, in a public ownership structure, but you've also been leading and chairing many boards, including Jersey Mike's, ServPro, Abercrombie and Fitch, many more. You've written on the topic of leadership with your book, The Challenge Culture, and you own a football club, Leyton Orient. I mean, you're really getting at this topic through so many lenses, and our conversations when we were writing the book remains vividly about how do you recognize complacency, and how do you then combat it, and it'll be a great conversation. Thank you again.
Pleased to be here.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you. I mean, being a football fan myself, let me ask you. Now that you're owning and leading a football club, what have you learned from football that you can transfer into the boardroom, or that you would have transferred into your leadership at the helm of Dunkin'? I'm curious. So what are the connective points here?
Well, firstly, just to give you a little bit of perspective, I've supported Leyton Orient, which is a League One team, for 67 years. It's based in East London. For those who want to know the geography, I'm actually in Florida at the moment, but I live basically in Boston. So I'm away from the team, so that's an interesting perspective. But we had an owner for 3 years who did a lot of bad things, and in English football, or soccer as Americans call it, you go up and down depending on your performance. And we went down from League One to League Two to what's called the National League, and the club was basically broken. So I put together a consortium back in '97. I've been chairman since. I did sell 75% of the club last year to a guy with a fantastic vision who happens to be a CEO of a public company. So he and I get on very well because we're both CEOs. But what I've learned from football is I always thought retail and fast food was a brutal business. You have daily numbers. You know, if yesterday's numbers aren't good, you don't recover them. You can't. It's not like the car business where you say, I would have bought that car today. No, couldn't be bothered. I'll buy it tomorrow. Once the day has gone by in food, you've lost it. And football is that on steroids. Everything happens so quickly. If you have to let a manager go, you don't have, and by the way, apologies to you and all my friends at Spencer Stewart, you don't have 3 or 4 months to recruit them. You have to do it in 2 weeks. Right. So everything is very quick. And having led some franchise businesses, I always talk about the 2 Fs, franchisees and fans. They're both very emotional. They're very opinionated. And for most of our fans in East London, Leyton Orient is the most important thing in their life.
Right.
So I think my take is speed is important. Listening to sometimes emotional views is very important. And getting that feedback, and we're going to talk about the complacency trap, I think that feedback from fans and sometimes from players. Right after this call today, we have an all-staff meeting. We have all the players, we have all the people who work in marketing, finance, and everything else that goes into a football club. And we want them to know what's going on, but we also want to hear from them. So I've learned a lot from football, but the biggest thing is speed.
Wow. So at the same time, speed, let's talk about time, big component of speed. You mentioned 67 years, a fan of Leighton. I think I read somewhere, right? Like when you showed up at the club, it was like it's 10 players, no physio, nothing. It was basically
Right.
the clubs and scramble. And at the same time, it requires this intense speed, adaptivity in the moment. How do you reconcile those two time horizons to be acting, to go fast, but to go fast in the right direction, not in the wrong direction?
That's a great question. And I think one of the things that really helped us before we bought the club, we had people on this side of the water and that side of the water, and we used to meet every morning at 5:30 before our day jobs to put a plan. So we had a plan, and I know it's a very old-fashioned phrase, to fail to plan is to plan to fail.
Yeah.
And we were determined to have a plan that we went in with, and it gave us a guideline of what to do. But as you say, we had surprises every day. I mean, in the middle of June, with a season that starts in August, we had sold no season tickets. So we had to move very quickly. So one of the things I think is interesting, coming predominantly from the quick service restaurant industry, I'm used to things happening every day.
Yeah.
I think a lot of industries, and I've worked in engineering, I worked for 3 engineering companies, think about months. I think thinking about days is very important. So you have a long-term vision. But to give you an example, this morning for Jersey Mike's Tropical Smoothie, I wake up and I look at yesterday's numbers.
Yeah.
And that's important because it tells you how you did yesterday. So I think too many people think one way or the other, too short term or too long term.
Yeah.
And I think football taught me you've got to balance the two. And you have to discuss it. What did we learn from yesterday? How can we improve? And that day, it may have been a special day. It may be Easter Sunday, as it was 3 days ago,
Yeah.
will get replicated next year. So how do you do better on Easter Sunday next year? So it's this constant theme. It sounds a bit Japanese. The
Yeah.
constant desire to improve, I think, is how you bridge that long term and short term.
Yeah. Now let me go out on a limb here. This is also probably what helped you create a great collaboration when you stepped into the role of the Dunkin CEO role, right? Because you didn't just have one private equity partner who was backing the enterprise, but you had 3 of them, and that in itself creates a big tension. Tell us a little bit about the differences between privately led and publicly led organizations, but also I'm sure those 3 private equity sponsors were not all pushing in the same direction, and I imagine speed and planning and focus on detail helped you to align everyone around a common direction. But tell us a little bit about how do you lead in a private equity context, and how that compares and contrasts into the public domain.
Again, a little bit of perspective. I'd led one company, which was Papa John's as CEO,
Yeah.
where I had a very interesting founder to deal with, and that kind of trained me. I'd never really worked with private equity when I went to Dunkin, and as you say, I had 3 PE firms who'd bought the company 3 years before. That was Bain, Carlyle, and TH Lee, and they were all different. They had different perspectives, as you say. I think they worked, and I worked very closely at the relationship. And I think one of the things that worked exceptionally well, there's nothing clever about it. We had a meeting every week on a Monday.
Yeah.
We had a 1-hour meeting, 5 o'clock every Monday.
Yeah.
And we set one ground rule that because there was 3 of them, if we had 4 different opinions, I, as CEO, decided. And amazingly, that simple rule worked very well. And I still see many of those board members. They're good friends of mine now, and we reflect back on those meetings. So I think the learning there is you have to have a process for making decisions.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm back in the PE world with Jersey Mike's and Tropical Smoothie and another company called Fooder, which is a disruptor in the let's call it the provision of meals at lunchtime space. Yeah. And that's owned by another PE firm, Valor, predominantly. So I think it's very important in a private company to have this constant communication. But one thing a lot of CEOs, I think, fail, they're not open. they try and hide things from their partners.
Yeah.
And the number of times I was told at both Papa John's and Dunkin, hey, Nigel, don't tell them everything. We want to hold something back. It doesn't work. Be transparent, be open. And I think that helped build the trust over time. And it's interesting on trust. I had an interesting thing happen to me. I joined and they said, look, we can't give you your long-term incentive because the program is broken. We need to do it. Little did I know I'd have to wait a year. When I finally got it, I said, wow, that seems really generous. And they said, yeah, because you trusted us. You know, I went a whole year without receiving anything.
Yeah.
And I think this is very important. Trust is absolutely critical. You have to trust your partners. You have to be open with them. And I think that's the way to move forward. So that was my first experience with being private. I really enjoy it now. Blackstone, in my mind, is a fantastic company to work with, particularly when you're in retirement, as I am. I'm now, anyone who's done the math, I'm now 76. I love everything I do with Blackstone. Blackstone's a great company to work with, some really smart but nice people. So the private world has been very good to me. But then you asked me to talk about the public world. I really enjoyed that too. And I think the same rules apply. If you're open and transparent, you get by. I learned a lot from analysts. I learned a lot from investors. I mean, you go and see people in, say, Kansas City or Denver or somewhere, and some person has come up with an analysis of Dunkin that you'd never thought of. So recognize it. I mean, in your book, I love the quote. Adam Grant said, effective leaders score high on humility and confidence.
Yeah.
Humility is being willing to say to an analyst, wow, never thought of that. Thank you. I mean, that makes that investor feel good.
It really does. Now, it clearly transparency is the through line to build trust, both in a private and a public setting. One thing that we observed and you probably, you felt this, is in a public company setting, the CEO can effectively act as the gatekeeper between board and executive team and literally control the storyline to a great extent. It's much harder to do that in a private equity setting, right? Where your investors, where your board is much more in a dialogue with your leadership team, where ops teams are coming into the organization to help. Tell us a little bit more about different failure modes that CEOs might be having in these contexts. Not bringing your sponsors along in a private equity context. I would go out on a limb and say many public companies are not acting with the speed that is necessary and are sort of too enamored with the quarterly board meeting cadence that slows them down. What do you think?
I think in private and public, the key relationship has to be between the chair and the CEO. And if there's no chair, it's the lead director. Yeah. That relationship is critical and you have to work at it. So I'm currently the chairman of a public company and we have a fantastic CEO in Fran Horowitz, who's been extremely well acclaimed for her work at Abercrombie and Fitch. She and I meet every 2 weeks. We talk about what's going on, but the key thing is I have a role. You talk about the gatekeeper. Yeah. So as a chairman, you have a gatekeeper role with what the board think. And one of the observations I've made over time in public companies, unlike private companies, the board, say, comes to a meeting, 3 months later is the next meeting. That's far too long. The world is moving too quickly. And one of my favorite phrases to CEOs is, yeah, go over it again. The board will forget. You can't remember what happens in every board meeting. So in between board meetings at Abercrombie, I meet with every single board member for 10, 15 minutes. And they have one job, to tell me 2 things that we should talk about at the next board meeting. The benefit of that is 1, makes them think back at what was discussed. 2, they have to think where we are now. I mean, it may be that since the last board meeting, the oil price has gone up. You've had Israel and the US fighting Iran. Tariffs have changed. All kinds of things have happened since the last board meeting. So I think one of the challenges that people struggle with is keeping board members up to date. So that's one way we do it. In the private world, it's interesting, and I'll give you the Blackstone cadence. We meet every 3 months as board members, but every month we have a financial review. Board members don't have to attend, but they're encouraged to attend. And that keeps them up to date with the business because, and I'm going to be repetitive here, a lot happens in 3 months. So, but you're right. The thing you said, in a public company, it's the CEO that acts probably more as the gatekeeper than the chairman. I think it's a bit more the chairman in the private companies.
Yeah.
But what I would suggest is the CEO is the person who connects with the investors, with the outside world, with the industry. And I think one of the things that's changed a lot since I was a CEO, I was last a CEO 8 years ago, is you've got to influence policymakers more than then. I mean, the world moves at a pace. And right now we have an administration that moves probably faster than normal. So you have to find ways to influence the actions, and that's down to the CEO. The CEO role, in my view, is much more difficult than when I was a CEO. The role of the chairman is to be supportive and help the CEO go through that difficult journey.
And the role of the CEO will likely just continue to get more difficult, right? Because you can extrapolate that, right? With the onset of AI and everything that's going on, tomorrow will be harder than today, and the day after tomorrow will be harder than tomorrow, right? But I want to come back to something that you said earlier about the accountability mechanism that you installed in between board meetings to keep board members both grounded in the discussions that we had in the past, but also forward looking, because that's exactly one of the techniques to begin combating complacency, not running on autopilot, not letting momentum dissipate. And the conversation around complacency was one of the most memorable that I've had with you, right? I still remember the clarity, not only the self-awareness that complacency might be creeping into the system, but also the clarity and force with which you were acting against it, right? So for context, I think 2015, Dunkin same-store sales are plateauing, they're stagnating, and you're beginning to ask yourself these hard questions. How do you disrupt yourself, and how do you do that with your team, right? The team may no longer be the right team that you had put together 5 years ago. Tell us a little bit about how you're detecting complacency and how do you effectively take action against it? Because I see many CEOs maybe detecting it, but struggling with taking action for various reasons.
Okay, so it is interesting. And in the book, just to be clear, you talk about complacency tends to happen in 6 to 9 year phase. And I was a CEO for 9 years at Dunkin. Before that, I was a CEO for 4 years at Papa John's. I personally think about 7 is the right time scale.
Yeah.
So we did 2 or 3 things. Firstly, not directly answering the question you just asked. One thing we did every couple of years, unannounced, I'd say in our weekly meeting, okay, guys, an announcement. We've been bought by a private equity company today. Forget everything we're going to talk about. What would they change from what we're doing now? The great benefit of that is it makes everyone think about what we're doing now. It may be the processes we've set up. It may be the reports that we produce. It may be the way we communicate with the stores. It may be the way we communicate with the franchisees. The reason for going through that theoretical exercise is to get everyone to challenge what they're doing today. And as you said at the start, the book I wrote is called The Challenge Culture, which basically means constantly challenge everything in a polite, nice way, not an aggressive way, but make sure that you're constantly improving by challenge and use the resources. You talk about the comp sales. Who are the best people to tell us about what's going on? Go out and talk to the franchisees. So we up the amount of communication with our franchisees. You get a bunch of franchisees in a room, to explain the situation and say, what do you think we should do? Again, it's that partnering. It's a bit like the partnership I talked about earlier on with the private equity people. one thing we did at Dunkin is we brought in a consulting partner who looked at what we're doing, who looked at what the competition are doing. But here's another thing that a lot of people find frightening. I used to go out and talk to financial analysts, or even investors, and you'd sit down with them, you go through the story, which all CEOs do and usually get bored doing. But at the last 5 minutes, I would say, at the end, I want to ask you a few questions. First question, what are we doing wrong?
Yeah.
Then I just sit there, put my arms together and say, tell me. I mean, people are shocked you actually want to know.
Yeah.
So it's how you deliver that question. Very open question. Tell us what we're doing wrong. Another question, what would you like to see us doing? By getting the consulting company, the franchisees, obviously we're talking to our team, plus the investors, you very quickly get ideas. And the reason investors are important, and it's very well laid out in your book, is they go and see the competition. I mean, one of our big competitors was obviously Starbucks. Most analysts and investors meet Starbucks. I don't meet with them. They do. So they usually have good ideas. Have you thought about introducing this kind of iced coffee? Might be an example. So it's all within your own control. It's not complicated. You just have to be open and willing to the feedback from a range of audiences.
And I would add to that list, Nigel, right? It's not just the investors, it's your corporate lawyers, it's your strategic advisors, it's your talent advisors, it's people like me who go from company to company. There's a cross-pollination process, right? Where you can tap into that external perspective. But all too often you see a management team and a CEO, the longer they're together, the more insular, the more introspective the dialogue becomes, and the more time is being spent inside the organization. And when we run a long-term succession for a company, you'll be surprised, or you won't be surprised, how many times we'll say, hey, your future leaders, they might be ready in 3 to 5 years, but what they're really lacking is external perspective. Oftentimes they've grown up in this company for decades, but they don't really know what the outside world really looks like. So there's a real status quo bias here.
I totally agree. I think it's interesting. One of the things I always say when people talk about that is, if you can, go on another board. It doesn't have to be a big fancy company. It could be some charity. It could be a school board, because you then learn a bit more about strategy. You learn about how other people think. Another great activity is when I'm out exercising, I listen to podcasts nonstop. Even maybe one of yours, Claudius. But I think it's so important to get these other perspectives. What are companies doing? And going back to what you said earlier about the speed, I started work in 1970. And when I speak to students, I often say to them, I had a great machine that worked really hard in 1970. What was it? Everyone says a calculator. The answer was a pen. It wasn't a typewriter, because in those days in England, I wasn't allowed to type. You gave that to a secretary. But you think the revolution of technology since 1970 has made us better, in my view. And if I had to give one tip today, I'd encourage everyone, learn as much as you can about AI. And we had a brilliant session a couple of months ago at Abercrombie. The whole board went through a 2-hour session on AI. And I think we all came out a lot wiser and a lot better.
That's fantastic. Tell us a little bit we talked in our conversation earlier this week around the influence of AI. And I see AI being an incredible sparring partner to provide outside-in perspective, to question the status quo, to combat complacency, right? Like how should CEOs be interacting with AI and use it to their advantage?
Okay, so I've got a very clear view on that. Number one, the CEO has to be the AI champion. It's no good saying, well, that's an AI. AI is an IT job. You've got to be the champion, because this is going to be the bastion of change for your company. Secondly, use it in simple use situations. Some examples that we're doing in my companies. One is we're using it to analyze the numbers more effectively. Two, Blackstone are using it Blackstone's got 260 companies. They use it to summarize all the results for senior leadership.
Right.
But here's the one I really like, and I've used this for about a year. And going back to your first question, in football, as I said earlier, we have to recruit very quickly.
Yeah.
We have a limited window in the summer, and last year we brought in about 20 players.
Wow.
So these days we have all the analytics on player. Claudius, is he's right-footed, he's good heading, and all that kind of stuff.
You got me right on. That's exactly.
No, that's true. And you're a little bit slow though.
Oh, totally. Mentally.
And we then added AI, and we went on. I used Perplexity, and I said, "Tell me about Claudius as a player for a League One team. Tell me his pros and cons." It's amazing what comes up. So I then took that, and I'd done a lot of CEO and board recruitment, and I do it for those candidates. And the current CEO of Jersey Mike's, halfway through his interview, I pull out this piece of paper. I said, "I'm going to the bathroom. This is what AI says about you. Pros and cons." I came back. He said, "This is amazing. This is absolutely spot on."
Yeah.
Because it covered some of the areas of concern.
Yeah. Yeah. It's incredible, right? Like, it's incredible how much time it takes out of the process and provides information in real time.
And it's going to make us all better. Yes, we all have a concern, and I've got two kids who are 21 and 19, and I worry as everyone else about jobs in the future. Well, people were worried about the internet.
Yeah.
They were worried about email. So I think we constantly have to adjust to the times, and AI is going to make all companies get better, in my view.
Yeah. Well, you're talking about the future, and you mentioned earlier that you're retired. I would say you're far from retired, right? And in fact, you've done a transition incredibly well that many CEOs underestimate or don't quite even have on the radar until they're staring into it, which is that second act, right? How do you transition into a life where you may not be the center of attention anymore, where you're not the identity of a company, and you have to transform your identity? Now, you've done this exceptionally well. You mentioned your senior advisor role at Blackstone, chairing multiple boards, being involved with football. But if you're going back, in our last conversation we had, Carol Tomey, the CEO of UPS here, and she said, "Well, I wish I had had this book at the beginning of my tenure to see the reinvention coming that I am currently going through." I'm wondering, if you're going back to your year 6, 7, 8, being the CEO, what do you wish you had learned about that transition?
Well, firstly, the day you're not a CEO, you say, "Oh, what am I going to do today?"
Yeah.
And I think the biggest problem in retirement is, what are you going to do? I mean, so I retired basically I was still going to be the chairman of Dunkin.
Yeah.
I was still on 2 other boards, but that really felt like a big vacuum in my life, because I was also worried, as being the ex-CEO, now chairman, of still trying to run the company, but that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I decided to obviously do my book, and I also decided to focus on the football club.
Yeah.
But I had a spot of luck that Blackstone came calling from a chairman of ServPro, and I really wanted to find a way of doing that and doing it effectively.
Yeah.
And then one thing led to another. I became a senior advisor. So I think, to answer your question, I wish I'd planned better.
Yeah.
I did have some ideas of doing CEO coaching for a bit, but I wish I'd done better than I have. But I lucked out because Blackstone, through a search firm, not Spencer Stewart, approached me. And I really think, if I had to give the advice to people who are retiring, it would be, think about what you want to do. What do you like doing? And I truly believe, and I may pass tomorrow, but longevity is done by constantly working out and having intellectual stimulus. And I find one of the benefits, I'm chairman of 5 companies, and I sit on 2 other boards as well as the Blackstone advisor role. One company helps another company because you see different perspectives that you can pass from one company to another. So I'd encourage them to do that. But as a really interesting article came out about fitness this morning, and it talked about don't just focus on one sport, do lots of sports because it helps different muscle groups.
Yeah.
I think the same applies to the companies.
Yeah. It's this physical and cognitive ambidexterity, right? It's this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Nigel, we're hitting time. I just want to get one quick question in from our audience, which earlier when we talked about transparency and openness, and just tell us, like, in what ways can first-time CEOs show openness to their board, and what should they hold back? And I'm asking in particular, think about this at different stages, right? Like when you're in your first year, when you're in your third year, right? Like that relationship between trust and accountability that is so important to balance in the appropriate ways. How can CEOs be open?
Well, I think in a private company, it's easier because you meet with the board more often. Well, particularly with the PE people.
Yeah.
And both the CEOs I currently have are in their first 2 years, let's say, of Jersey Mike's and Tropical Smoothie Cafe. Both are very open, but they're very planful in how they do it.
Yeah.
When we have the weekly meeting, we agree the agenda before the meeting that they're going to talk about. And sometimes they will say to me, okay, I want to cover this. I might say, well, I think it'd be better if we cover that a few weeks' time. So I'm kind of the check and the balance on what they want to talk about.
Yeah.
So again, it goes back to that strong relationship between the CEO and the chairman. I always start, I have a firm belief, you trust people until they let you down. And I think most boards, and I'm sure there are some who aren't, most boards value the fact you're going to share with them issues.
Yeah.
One of the CEOs I currently have, he shares probably more than I would have done.
Right.
But amazingly, it works really well. So I've learned from him. I mean, he shares everything, he asks for opinions, and it may seem extremely slow moving by doing that. He's actually moving incredibly quickly.
Yeah.
So a little bit of over processing with the information, getting input, tweaking it, I think works really well. So my advice is be open, identify the problems, don't say what, and don't use inflammatory comments. I mean, I think we live in a world where people are beginning to use really strong language. I don't think that's needed. I think you say, look, I am concerned about the way we open new stores, or I'm concerned about the supply chain. I'm thinking, this is key, I'm thinking about bringing in some specialist consultants to look at the supply chain. What do you think about that? And you'll be amazed. The PE people often say, well, that's interesting. We had the same problem at another company and they did it by this. So I think it's using the board, using the PE people as a team, and that's often forgotten. And just I'll throw in one thought that you didn't ask. One thing people miss about boards is they are a team as well.
Yeah.
And the board team needs to be refreshed, renourished. And one of the things I think we do really well at Abercrombie is after a day's board meeting, we go back to the hotel, and I've got this vision in the winter, sitting around a fire, having a drink. It's amazing how many good thoughts come out of those discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. Change the context, and a new set of ideas emerge, right? Nigel, I could go on for hours, but we're hitting time. Thank you for being so open and transparent with us today, sharing your valuable lessons about success in the role and how to help others being successful. Thank you again. It was a terrific conversation.
Claudius, thank you. And every time I look at the book, I think, I've learned that again.
That's wonderful. Excellent. All right. Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you.